Hi, and welcome to today's workshop called Communication on the Job. We have Brooke Henderson here who's going to be presenting communication on the job for you. Please let me know if you have any questions throughout the presentation. There's a Q&A button at the bottom that you can ask questions, and we'll be sure to ask Brooke and get the answers. Brooke, thank you for joining us.
Oh, no problem. So like Jessica said, my name is Brooke Henderson and I am the intake specialist for the Elevate program. However, I do a lot of career readiness workshops for the Workforce Connection. So go ahead with the first slide, Jessica. So communication is one of the most vital skills in the workplace. But in order to be effective at it, you have to know what communication actually is. So communication is an exchange of feelings, ideas, and information, whether it's in different mediums like speaking, writing, signals, or behaviors. And what I always tell people is it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So a big part of that is having what's called tact. Tact is basically knowing, having a sense of what to do or say in certain situations to avoid offending others. So the example that I always give to be able to determine whether or not you have tact is a simple, funny, but very relevant, relatable example. And that's if you're in the grocery store and you see somebody and you're not sure if they're overweight or pregnant, are you the type of person that wonders and is not sure so they don't say anything at all? Or are you the person that insists you know what is going on with them and you go up to them and say, oh, how far along are you? And they go up to you and say, oh, I'm not pregnant. Obviously if you don't have tact to be mindful of what to say and do in certain situations, it can be very awkward and it can lose you different opportunities in your professional development. Go ahead and go with the next slide, Jessica. So as far as communication goes, there are many types of communication. Our most common one that we use is verbal. Verbal can range in a lot of different ways with like the sounds of your voice, the language that you use, and the tone. So some examples for that are, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the way that you talk to your friends is a lot different than you talk to your mom or your grandma a lot of times. Also, if you're a parent or you have kids, you know very well that tone plays a big part in communication as well. You can tell if somebody's angry, if they have an attitude, just by the tone of their voice. The other big part of communication is auditory, and that involves listening and hearing. Some people can be very great listeners and not very great at hearing, or vice versa. They can hear what you say, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're listening. The next type of communication is written communication. Written communication has become more popular over the years with technology, and that's using things such as email, instructions, and text messages. Also, emojis. That's become very popular lately. The next type of communication is visual communication. So visual communication is kind of what I'm doing right now to help communicate with you. You can see me, but you can also see the visuals that I've provided on the PowerPoint. So that's like signs, pictures, symbols, and presentations. Now, my favorite, and I think that's a type of communication that's even bigger and more important than verbal, is the nonverbal communication. And that has to do with your body language, your facial expressions, and your gestures. So I want you to think about the ways that we give what's called unspoken messages. And unspoken messages are things that we say or vibes that we give off through communicating with others without actually speaking. So, if you have road rage and somebody cuts you off, we like to do a common gesture that tells people, hey, guess what? I'm a little angry at you. Also, one of the biggest nonverbal communications that you typically find in relationships with like significant others or your loved ones is the silent treatment. If somebody's ignoring you and not talking to you, that gives you a big message, oh crap, I'm in trouble. Other things that people do, they may roll their eyes. I know my brother personally loves that one. What else is there? There's, slamming the doors, stomping your feet, sighing, smacking your lips if somebody tells you something to show that you have an attitude. So there's many different unspoken ways that we give messages. Go ahead on to the next slide, Jessica. So one thing that I added into the workshop today is a little bit of highlights on how to communicate remotely, because everything going on lately with the COVID-19 stuff, remote communication has become very, very important. A lot of us are working from home, and it's very important to be able to communicate. So I gave you a few tips here to help you be able to effectively communicate when you're communicating remotely. So the first one is to make sure that you set up a quiet workspace. You want to make sure that you have a space of your own. I know that it's almost impossible. Trust me, I have dogs. They bark and they do different things. Play with their toys when I'm trying to have a phone call, you know. Sometimes it's impossible, but try your best to set up a quiet workspace. You also may want to, if you have different meetings or maybe like an interview, to check on your internet connection and troubleshoot your equipment, like your computer or your router or your different devices that you'll be using beforehand, to make sure that everything is working efficiently and that you can hear things and you can see yourself and know what you look like and what your setup will look like. The other big thing is you want to make sure that you check your email and phone calls regularly. That if I didn't do that, I would be so lost working from home right now. So just make sure that you're constantly checking your phone and emails regularly. Also, if you can, even though, you know, I've done a couple of these workshops now, it's an adjustment, even though I'm used to doing things live, doing it virtually on the computer with different technology is a learning experience. So try to get yourself familiar and implement virtual technology such as Zoom, which is what I'm on right now, Skype, which I know people have used before to video chat with their loved ones. And also there's Microsoft Teams, which is very similar to Zoom. Just try to implement those, and maybe, I know right now a lot of different organizations and places are giving a lot of free tutorials and webinars like this one to help you learn how to use those resources. And the better equipped that you are to use those types of technology just helps you develop professionally even better. And the biggest advice that I can give you, which is why I made it in capital letters, is to be patient when you are working remotely, because it can be very frustrating. You know, you could never have any issues with your internet connection or your equipment until you get home and you have to use it, and then it crashes or your whole computer crashes. You know, that's normal. We're all experiencing that right now, so just be patient. Go ahead, Jessica, with the next slide. Okay, so the biggest part of communication that often leads to problems with communicating is being able to effectively listen. So there's a difference between listening and active listening. When you're actively listening to somebody, that means that you're paying attention fully to what the other person is saying. You're not thinking about your own response or what you have for lunch, you know. I'll give you an example. So, you know, sometimes we've all been there. You're in a meeting and you're listening. You're supposed to be fully engaged in the meeting, and you're supposed to be listening to everything that the person is saying. But all you can think about is what you want to say, or, you know, what you're going to be doing after this, or how you can't wait until it's over. If you're doing that, you're not actively listening. You want to be fully engaged. And if you are fully engaged and you're not sure of what the person is saying, let them finish what they're saying first and then provide your response. And if you're not sure about something, ask questions to gain a better understanding. So the way that you can do that is by using open-ended questions. So open-ended questions are things that require more than a yes or no answer. So for example, if somebody comes in to me and I say, "Are you having a bad day?" the only answers that they can give me are yes or no. So obviously I would know, yes, they are having a bad day, or no, they're not having a bad day, but I wouldn't know, you know, the background behind it. So if I say, "Why are you having a bad day?" that requires the person to tell me a little bit more to help me get a better feel for why they feel the way that they feel. Go ahead, Jessica, with the next slide. Okay, so the next thing with communication is whether you're being aggressive, assertive, or there's one that I don't have on here, but they're all three very important. The first one is being assertive. When you're in the workplace and you're communicating, or even if you're not in the workplace and you're communicating, you always want to be assertive. When you're assertive, you know what you stand for and you can make your point, but you're doing it in a professional way by remaining calm and professional and not, you know, giving somebody an attitude or being too emotional and, you know, being destructive in the conversation. When you're being aggressive, which is where you run into a lot of that when you're working in customer service, you show your emotions and you try to get what you want by intimidating people. So I'll give you a common example. At Schnucks, where I work part-time, we get a lot of angry customers that come in. And, you know, sometimes they misread the signs and think that a certain item should be a particular price, but it was just that they misread the sign. So a lot of times they'll come up to us and say, this is supposed to be this price. And they'll think that by being angry and trying to intimidate us that we're going to change the price. But the best way to get what you want is to be assertive. If you're being assertive and you're being professional and respectful to me, I'm way more likely to help you. That's why they always say you get more bees with honey rather than vinegar. And the last one that I don't have on here is being passive. There's a lot of people that can be very passive. And when you're passive, you don't really stand up for what you believe in, and you kind of let people walk all over you. And then I guess, now that I think about it, there is even a fourth one, which is passive aggressive. So these are the people that are on social media, you know, and they make a big post on social media like Facebook or something about somebody, but it's very indirect, and they're showing their frustrations, but they're not directing it to the person. The best way to effectively communicate, especially in regards to like conflict and things like that, is to talk to the person privately and directly. So just keep that in mind the next time that you're trying to decide what you should be. You should always be assertive. That's the best way to be. Go ahead, Jessica, with the next slide. So now I have for you some tips for effectively communicating. So you want to make sure that you're speaking efficiently. You want to communicate what you're trying to communicate very clearly and directly. You don't really want to try and beat around the bush or say too much. And what I mean by that is sometimes when we're nervous or we're trying to communicate something that makes us feel a certain way, we like to ramble. The more direct you are, the better your message is going to be received. So just make sure that when you are speaking, even if it might be something that makes you feel a little uneasy or can make the situation awkward, as long as you're trying to effectively communicate, always make sure that you do that very confidently. The next thing is honesty. You want to make sure that you're communicating the right information. If you're upset about something, don't let your emotions get the best of you. Make sure that you're communicating what you feel and why you feel that way, and not, you know, communicating the wrong information. The biggest part for communicating, I think, is being able to control your emotions. You want to speak about the result that you want. If you come to somebody and you want to communicate with them, but all you're doing is yelling, a lot of times the other person, which is receiving the message, will shut down, walk away, or the problem will escalate. Avoid pointing the finger. Try to use I language, such as, you know, I feel this way when you do this because of this, rather than when you do this, I want to, you know, punch you. That's not going to help the situation. It's going to make the other person upset, and you're not going to have an effective result that you want. The other thing is, don't overcome the other person. So you don't want to dominate the conversation. You want to express your opinion, but you want to allow others to speak as well. Jessica, go ahead with the next slide. Okay, so code shifting in communication. This is probably like my favorite thing. It's very common. We do it every day. And code shifting is mixing languages or patterns of speech in conversations. We do this all the time, but we don't even realize that we're doing it a lot of times. And understanding how to communicate with people is important in each situation. So that's why code shifting is important. So I'll give you a couple examples of code shifting. A lot of times with code shifting, what happens is people get very, you know, oh, I see somebody that is professional, so I need to get into my customer service voice. That would be code shifting. Or if you're somewhere, like let's say you're at the mall and you see your 5th grade teacher, how you're talking to your friends is going to be a lot different than how you talk to your 5th grade teacher or your boss. You know, you use different slang and types of language. When you're greeting somebody like a friend, you might say, hey, what's up? If you see your boss, you might say, Good morning, how are you doing today? So that's code shifting, and we all do that almost every day. Go ahead with the next slide, Jessica. What you should share at work. So when you're communicating, a lot of people overshare at work. So I'm here to give you a few tips on what you should share and what's okay to share compared to what's okay to, or what's not okay to share. So we have what you should share first. So what you should share are things that are pretty innocent and harmless, like your favorite foods. So for example, when I get new coworkers, a lot of times we bond over our favorite foods because we end up eating lunch a lot, and that helps build rapport and relationships. And that's a pretty, it's not a controversial topic or anything, so that's pretty safe. Same thing with your likes and dislikes in music or TV shows. You can't really go too wrong with that. What you can share is the strengths that you have on the job. The reason that that's a safe thing to talk about at work is because most of the things that you recognize as strengths are things that your coworkers and your peers already recognize about you as strengths as well. It's also okay to talk about your professional goals and ambitions. As long as they are work appropriate, that's totally okay. What you don't want to share is you don't want to talk about anything such as religion or politics or any other things that may be controversial. It's okay to have, what your thoughts and your beliefs or whatever, but you want to kind of separate what you communicate about at work from your profession or from your personal life. Sometimes people can misjudge based on something that you say, and it's just easier to stay away from those topics altogether. The other thing that you don't want to share with your coworkers or peers or anyone, unless it's something that you want to develop with professionally, are your shortcomings that prevent you from getting ahead at work. So you don't want to, although we like to have, think that everyone that's working on our team has the same goals together, sometimes you do work with people who want to throw you under the bus. And if you are telling someone that maybe you have a difficult time dealing with conflict at work or angry customers, and you and a coworker are going for the same job, sometimes what can happen is if you disclose the wrong information, they can try and use that that information that you disclosed against you to try and get the promotion over you. So just try not to share that stuff unless it's in a private area with like your manager, and that's something that you want to develop with professionally. The other thing that you shouldn't talk about at work is how much money you make. And the reason is everyone has different experience and different attributes and qualities, and everyone makes different amounts of money. Sometimes you may have worked for a company for a long time, or you started out making more than somebody who's been there for a long time and you have the same jobs and duties. But the other person doesn't know what your experience and your skills are. And sometimes disclosing how much money you can make can kind of put strain on relationships. So it's always best to avoid talking about how much money you make with others. The other thing that you shouldn't talk about is how you feel about people you work with. Unless, of course, it's hindering your job performance in some way. But again, that's where you would go privately and directly in another room that's quiet with your management team. Another big thing, your past illnesses and treatments. So what I mean by that is you don't want to share, even though you may be very proud of it, that maybe you're recovering, or you're in remission from cancer, or you're a recovering alcohol and substance abuse user. And the reason that you don't want to talk about those things, even though you're doing very well and you're very proud of those things, is because the first time that you are absent, people automatically, just by human nature, assume the worst. And as soon as you disclose that stuff, sometimes it can affect your job in a negative way. Now, on the other hand, sometimes it's very important to disclose maybe an illness that you have. So an example of that would be, let's say that let's say that you're in, one of my classes that I'm teaching or something, and I didn't know that you had seizures because you never told me. So I'm in the middle of teaching a class, and all of a sudden you freak out on the floor, and I'm freaking out because I don't know what's wrong. However, if you let me know, I have a history of seizures, if something like that happens, although I probably will be still freaking out inside, at least I know ahead of time that that's something that could possibly happen at some point. I hope that makes sense. Does anyone have any questions so far? All right, go ahead, Jessica, with the next slide. So those are the basic things today about communication and how to effectively communicate. If you guys have any questions that come up after the webinar is over, you can always rewatch the webinar if you forgot something, because we will be posting it on our pages on Facebook, or you can message me directly. That is my contact information, my email and my phone number. We also have many other workshops that we'll be doing and topics to be hitting. And if you have any suggestions, you can also provide those as well. So thank you for coming to the workshop today, and stay safe out there, okay?